And turn over the mic.
All righty, can y'all hear me okay? Good. So today we're going to be talking about a new candidate, also known as a counter measure, that's running for the position of intersection control in the county or city of Multi-Lane United Highways. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll agree with us that you need to vote for RCUT when you're sitting in the project team meetings and debating on what candidate or countermeasure you should apply to your intersection treatments. All right, so joking aside, this is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to start off talking a little about the why, the how, and the what for RCUTs. And we're going to do our case study, which is the US 231 corridor, just southwest of Bowling Green. Joe Plunk and John West and Justin, right? God, I'm terrible with names. They're going to go through some of the details of how the project came to be, some of the development challenges and solutions, and then some of our lessons learned in the construction phase. And then I'll wrap up with a few words. All right, so let's get into why RCUTs. The number one reason is because we are human. You know, our drivers, we got a few vehicles out there that maybe could drive for us, but for the most part, you know, 99.9% of the drivers out there are human. Humans make mistakes. It's just a fact of life. Nobody's perfect. We're going to make mistakes. You know, if you ask the average human, hey, you know, are you average driver? Not quite, you know, less than average or more than average. 8 or 9 out of 10 people will tell you they're better than average, but anybody that knows basic statistics knows that's somehow not right. You know, only 4 or 5 out of 10 should be better than average, right? But another thing when we look at the human aspect is somewhere in the neighborhood of 94% of all crashes involve some sort of human error or human factor. Doesn't mean that directly led to the crash, but it was a factor in the crash. But 94% is a pretty big number. It gets back to that idea that, you know, we're human, we're going to make mistakes. The last point here too is humans are vulnerable. So when we do get involved in crashes, depending on the speed and angle and that impact forces, if they exceed a certain threshold, we're going to create injury or worse in those crashes. And so that human element comes into play during the crash itself. And so we need to start basing our design decisions and our countermeasures on those facts. Mistakes are going to happen, crashes are going to happen, and there's only so much crash force that the human body can take. So how do we work that into our designs? And RCUTs is one of those ways. So more specifically, how do RCUTs help? Well, the big thing I like to remind everybody is, even though it looks complicated, RCUTs are actually simpler to drive. There's actually a lot less workload for the driver. And that is because of the much lower number of conflict points. When you look at the conflict points that are traditional intersections, we count 32, and you'll notice in the slide the red dots are those crossing conflicts where we tend to see those angle crashes that lead to really severe outcomes. RCUTs only have 14 conflict points, but what you'll notice is the number of crossing conflicts is extremely reduced. We go, I think, from 16 all the way down to 2. So that's a huge benefit on those crash areas, because you just can't get yourself involved in those angle crashes where those crash forces are extremely high. So it helps address some of that vulnerability with the driver. But just in general, though, because of those fewer conflict points, there's just a lot less workload on the driver, and there's less things to keep your eye on when you're at an intersection. You're going to be more successful and less likely to make a mistake, which then leads to less crashes. So just having fewer crashes opens up the opportunity for fewer of those severe outcomes. So more specifically then, well, what kind of benefits are we seeing? Well, they're pretty significant on the safety side, and there's some capacity benefits too. That, you know, I'm a big proponent of safety, so let's talk about those benefits. when we look at RCUTs on the national scene, we're seeing we're seeing about a 30% reduction in all crashes. So not just the angle crashes, all across the board at the intersection. We're seeing about 30% reduction in crashes, which is pretty good. There's a lot of safety countermeasures that 20–30% is like, that's a pretty big deal. But when we then look at the severe crashes nationally, we're seeing about a 70% reduction. And then there's a lot of variance, there's a lot of RCUTs across the nation. So it's not like they're hitting these numbers precisely, but just on average, 70%. And that is enormous. There's a lot of safety countermeasures that would love to be above 50%, but few obtain that. But RCUTs have been proven to really do a good job. In Kentucky, we're seeing a little bit better than the national reductions, which we're really excited about. So we've got 8 RCUTs in Kentucky on the ground that we've got at least 2 years of after data or more. And so when we look at those, what we're finding is that we're almost half of our total crashes have been reduced. The big plus is we're really close to 90%, 87% of our severe crashes, many crashes with an injury or worse, that has been reduced in our first 8 RCUTs. And we anticipate seeing that trend as we go. So with that, we'll jump into our case study. Joe's here to start us off with that. Thanks.
Okay, good morning. On to our case study. US 231 is a connector road between Bowling Green to the north and Scottsville to the south. It's an arterial that's experiencing rapid growth. Warren County is the second fastest growing county in Kentucky. According to the Kentucky State Data Center, the population is expected to grow by 55% between 2020 and 2050. And most of that growth is occurring on the south and southwest corner quadrants of the county, including this corridor. The ADT along US 231 is constructed as a 4-lane divided highway compressed median about 25 years ago, replacing the old 2-lane road. The ADT in 1998 was about 10,000 vehicles per day. It's now 19,000 vehicles per day. So you can see the commuter growth along with the residential growth in the area is affecting the traffic volumes. And also worth noting too is the speed limit. The posted speed limit changes within this project corridor. It is 65 miles per hour from about halfway through the project to Scottsville. And I'll point out on the map. You'll hear us talk about the community of Allenton, which is right here in the middle of the map. That's the south end of the project. So you can see highlighted in the map. As we zoom in on the next slide, just to kind of get your bearings about the project location. The project has along it a county park, which is very active. A lot of special events, thousands of people come for softball games, cross-country meets, other big events. An elementary school in Allenton. Well, now the project is here too, so Allenton being at the south end. The National Parkway, the southern terminus of the ends, and that is the north end of the project. The elementary school, also a internationally acclaimed golf course along the project, back to that. Residential subdivisions throughout, and some commercial development starting to happen along the corridor. The photos will just show basically what the map, what I was trying to explain on the map. So this drone photo is looking north toward Bowling Green. The Nasher Parkway is that intersection, so that's the north end of the project. You can see new subdivisions, you can see the golf course to the right, county park starting to emerge there on the left. This second photo is the south end of the project, so we're still looking north toward Bowling Green, and this is the community of Allenton. This is the full area. The elementary school is just off the photo. Very large church, several hundred people membership there. New convenience store, restaurant, none of this was here just 2 years ago. So a lot has changed in this area. And I'm thankful to say that with the RCUT project, we were able to be proactive, try to get in there before the signals are necessary. This intersection in Alberton. This is Mount Lebanon Church Road. This was the primary intersection that was of concern. And when Mike Vaughn and his counterpart, Deanna Mills, came in early 2019 and said, Mike, I got a project I want you to look at. So they were in Bowling Green for another project inspection. So we took a tour, got in the car, went about 15 minutes south. And I showed them this intersection because we had some crash experience. And I wanted to see if we could be eligible for some HSIP funding. And to my delight, as we drove through the corridor, we said, well, we should do all of these intersections. It's about 2 miles of these type of intersections, subdivisions, as I mentioned before. A lot of exposure to risk. So the way we went, April 2019, design funds were authorized, but the challenge had only just begun. So just a few months later, in July of 2019, there was a fatal crash at that intersection that I was emphasizing on the previous slide. A slow-moving vehicle turned left in the side street, and then there was a crash that resulted in a fatality. So, of course, immediately the calls come, as they had been previously, about the need for traffic signals, along with the rezoning for development, month after month. I'm sure you see it in your community, the planning commission meetings, standing room only, folks coming, the NIMBY type folks coming to oppose anything new, subdivisions, apartments. But yet they continue to be approved and constructed. So we needed to get this project on the ground as soon as possible. And fortunately, we had the design funds that summer, but we had to work with the public to address that we know and we're working on it. Please be patient. Fortunately, we were in District 3, we were fortunate that we had a couple of these that were either in under construction or in design. So this photo that you see is in Logan County. This was our first archive. It was already under construction in 2019 when the Albertson project took off. This one opened the traffic in October of 2019. And then in Warren County, on the western end of the county, on Russell Road, US 68, you can see the archive in this photo. And this was in conjunction with the city project, that roadway that you see taking off to the top of the photo. That's a city street, but KYTC designed. In fact, our own David Erickson, who was at the conference this week, designed the archive there along US 68. So we were able to tell folks, hey, just go down the road. You'll see an archive. You'll see it in action. You don't have to try to describe it to you. You can drive one and see it in action. But it still became the challenge. The challenge is, of course, engaging the user, and you can't do that with data alone. We've experienced that. I'm sure you've seen it at meetings where you try to portray something innovative like a roundabout, which we had experienced in Bowling Green a few years before, and everyone threw tomatoes at it until it opened, and then folks said, oh, this isn't so bad. And that happened with the Logan County archive as well. Lots of concerns during construction. As soon as it opened, all the calls just went away, and people adapted. So we all had great hopes that would be the same way in Albertson. So there was no public forum, and this was by design. With safety projects, you don't really have time to have public meetings and asking people for input. And maybe that's a mistake. Maybe you would choose to do it differently. But we were concerned that if you give too much time, there's time for the opposition to do their part and stop the project. And we've seen this elsewhere in Kentucky where that has happened, specifically on an archive project. But we did engage the key stakeholders. I told people I was like an encyclopedia salesman. So I got my exhibits and my maps, and I went to talk to the superintendent of county schools because of the elementary school. How is this going to affect school bus maneuvers? The judge executive in Warren County is the second longest serving judge in Kentucky, retiring this year after 29 years. So nothing happens in Warren County without his seal of approval for the most part. And then Jim Scott, who I told you we'd come back to the golf course. That golf course he owns. He also owns Scotty's Contracting in Stone. And no, it shouldn't be that way, but reality is you've got to get those key players on board, be your advocates, or a project will go nowhere. The personal, my last statement I'll make here, personal interaction is so important. It's not the most effective way to reach people, as far as efficiency, but it is effective as far as getting advocates. And I know you can't read this, but as I was reading through emails in preparation for the presentation, I had a smile on my face because a lot of what was coming out in late 19 and 2020, where folks were hearing about what we were doing. And this email, the subject line of the email says, please no J-turn. J-turn is another way we describe the archive. And I tell her, Ms. Harris, please give me a call. I would like to talk with you about that. And I did that numerous times, and not just me, our design team, folks within the office and contractor did that as well. And this one I was particularly pleased with. The subject line says, Allenton traffic light needed. And it's a very long email dialogue. It starts off with her basically blessing us out on why we're doing an archive. And then there's that engagement. Eventually a phone call. And the last message says, sounds good. Thank you again for helping to clear up my understanding of this proposal. And I will certainly share with the community and see if we can't work together to make this beautiful and safe. Again, not the most efficient way to reach folks, but it did work. And my last example is, I had a gentleman who called, he was very upset, wants a signal immediately. I said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm just home. Meet me out at the intersection in 20 minutes. And so I packed up my encyclopedias and I drove to the site and we stood on the shoulder of the road and I explained what an archive is, the movements. And he said, you know, that doesn't sound so bad. I think I could get behind that. So that's what it took to get some advocates. Certainly during construction, there was still some backlash, but and during design. But I'll turn it over to John now, who can carry us through the rest of the project.
Well, as you can see, Joe is the project champion, and every project like this needs a champion. And from beginning to end, as you can see, he was boots on the ground, and he really led the way for our project team and demonstrated that leadership that we needed. Decision making, we'll talk about that in a minute. You know, be patient on one of these type of projects because there's going to be a lot of changes, and the project was constantly evolving as we were faced with those challenging, you know, the growth issues there. Challenges, not issues really, but you know, I grew up in District 3, just north of Bowling Green, went to Western Kentucky University in the 90s, and actually cut my teeth on this corridor, 231, as an EIT in the design section. And so in metric, if you remember those days, built it in metric. But you know, how Bowling Green has changed over the years. As I visit the community now, I can't even find my way around. It's just amazing how much it's grown. So that's really part of the challenge here on this border, is that over time that 4-lane high tide facility just got really congested, and it's evolving so quickly. And you know, the crash rates were rising, but you know, the warrants for traffic signals are probably for borderline, or probably not yet. But a lot of the public pressure there to install signals at that next level along the corridor. So you know, having the leadership and the vision to create something different here, I think that's on the project. So Joe did a great job of summing up the problem statement, and then the solution. You know, we looked at a comprehensive approach to the corridor. So we didn't want to just look at one intersection and isolate that and then put a signal somewhere else, put a signal down here. And we really wanted to look at, hey, can we develop a solution that is corridor-wide, it's consistent, that raises the driver expectancy as they're traveling. So that's where our task came in. You'll see the phrase reasonable access, and I think Mike said it best earlier. If you look at our cuts, it's really not changing access at all to make that argument, but it certainly maintains reasonable access. And on a facility like this, if you've been on Dixie Highway or this corridor or any other 4-lane highway that's congested, there's no gaps at certain times. The peak hour volumes get to a point where there's no gaps. And so without gaps to make left turns, you're gonna make a right turn and you're gonna go turn around and go the other way. And we're just facilitating that in a less risky manner. So again, with the design considerations, rapid growth, and it was evolving constantly. We were putting the layouts together. I think we went through, gosh, probably 10 or 12 iterations. And then thought we landed on one and then made some adjustments and then, well, ran utility issues and met the water district out there and they dug their facility up and said, we can't get the material and when we can, it's gonna be expensive and we don't have time to relocate it. And so we shifted the wind a little bit to avoid that situation. And so just the typical project development challenges that you face on all of your projects. But we really wanted to move this, keep it moving. That was kind of the, as Joe mentioned, we didn't want to lose steam on this project. So, providing reasonable access, that includes the construction phase. And Justin's going to hit on that a little bit later. Some of the challenges that they faced in the field as this rolled out. But there was also a lot of discussion during the project development phase on MOT magic. And so then site distance, that's a critical piece because you're moving cars differently when you put an RCUT in. And so you're breaking down the decisions into phases, if you will, and those phases occur at different locations. So even though this was a high tide facility, 231, great design in metric. But when we come back and add some turning locations, want to make sure that those site distances were clear for this type of move. And then again, I hit on the expedited project schedule. And that leads us to kind of the next part of the project, and that is our proposal development. We decided early on, in order to keep this moving, limit no right of way, limit utility impacts, and get this to construction as fast as possible. And so I think the project team would all agree now that we would do it differently, and we are doing it differently on other projects, but we did put this into a proposal type letting, and we probably pushed the limit on what you could do with proposal documents, putting these plans with about 7 to 9 intersections in a proposal style procurement package. And so Justin's going to hit on that a little bit later too. But again, be patient as you're developing this type of project because things change all along the process. Don't be afraid to make those tweaks, adjustments along the way, even if it's 2 weeks before it goes to the letter. Sometimes you just got to make the change. So keep it moving. We use available LiDAR data, the supplemental survey, but we pushed the survey and that rolled into a special note for safety. You can see me after if you want to see what that looks like, but it was pretty long. And the staking special note was pushed to the contractor. Justin's going to hit on some of the challenges that he faced in construction with that note. So with that, Justin.
All right, the letting date for this project was February 19th of 21. And the lowest bid was awarded to Charles Louis Construction. They're out of Franklin, Kentucky. And the awarded cost was almost $3.5 million. The other competitor was Scotty's, of course. I think Joe had already mentioned that, which subdivision is basically right in front of this corridor. And they were still below Scotty's estimate, 14% below the engineer's estimate. So we were a little surprised at that. That was our first red flag there. That we may have some challenges on this project. The completion date was November 15th, 21. So Charles Louis began to work on May 24th of 21, and this project was broken into 3 phases. Phase 1 was close the outside lanes and construct everything on the outside of the roadway on both sides of the road. And, then the next phase was, phase 2A, and that was construct, or switch traffic over to the outside, close the inside lanes and construct the turn lanes and the median crossovers. And here's where we ran into some challenges. The first thing is the contractor really, was limited on their productivity. They started out with one crew out there. They had several mistakes they made. I know one instance, they milled up, full depth shoulder that they weren't even supposed to work on. And so they had to put that back, full depth for several hundred feet. So they weren't that efficient. We also run into issues with COVID quarantines. This is the middle of the pandemic. And these quarantines, were in, the prime contractor and their subs. That was affecting their workers, and the workload. This is going toward the end of the year when we got closer to the completion date. They were probably running about a month behind on their work. And, the colder temperatures were limiting the time that they had to put down the asphalt. So that was preventing them from getting the work done. We also had, in conjunction with the COVID quarantine, we had the supply issues of materials, especially with pipe for the drainage work. So as we're closing in on the completion date, the contractor, we had several meetings with them. And, we realized that they weren't going to get this project done by the time that, basically the weather was going to stop them from working anymore, from getting anything done. We really didn't want any lane closures out long-term, over the winter to basically be in the way. We didn't also want them to close down intersections, start work, and basically have that intersection tied up. So we did allow them to pause the work and continue in the spring. But it was on them to make everything safe. What I mean by that is they wedged up all of the drop-offs, either with pavement or DGA, striped everything to make it functional for the traveling public. And, moved all the barrels off the road, got all the lane closures out of the way so we could, have efficient flow. So once that was made safe and the lane closures were removed, we did agree on the completion date, of April 1st. So they had to have it done by then, or we're going to start charging LDs. So they, actually got back started in March, and actually finished it on April 1st. And so that last phase 2B, was where they actually shut down the intersection and poured those concrete medians to where, it forced the traveling public to go right if they had to make a left turn. So you can see some pictures here. So some of the challenges were, this was a proposal only project, like John had mentioned. The plans were inserted into the proposal. And so, it was tough just printing out the proposal and, getting the plan sheets to the right size, so you could actually see what's going on. We had some issues with the LiDAR information that they used. I'm sure is decently accurate, but it's not, near the scale that we really need, the accuracy that we needed out in the field to be able to check the survey. The next thing is the special note, for the, surveying or the, special note for safety. It says contrary to section 201, perform items 1 through 2, usually performed by the engineer. And that is the contractor is to provide the adequate control points, and they are to verify that the sections are to grade in alignment and adjust if necessary. So that proved difficult for this contractor to do that. They didn't have a very strong surveying department. And so it made it tough on us as well, to check what they were doing. Basically, they would model in their office, come out in the field, show us what they had, and we kind of had to look, yeah, that looks right to me. So that was the challenge there. You know, the next challenge is the traffic control on the 4-lane divided highway. Joe, already mentioned the parks and church. The other thing, you know, everybody on this corridor seems like, even though the speed limit is 65 on parts, 65 on the other, everybody goes about 70, really. And, you know, people just didn't want to slow down, even when we had the lane closures out. Joe had already mentioned developments, and then there was just a lot of motorist confusion. Once we built everything on the outside on the access roads, they had to make a right. And so they were confused because the intersection wasn't closed yet, the third phase wasn't done. They were confused on which way to go. Of course, you know, there was pushback from that. A lot of people would stop or, you know, give us the middle finger or whatever. As they were going by, we had several different emails. I think Joe got a lot of heat. But we pushed through, kept going, and, you know, COVID-19, you know, affected our staff as well. Yeah, I've already talked about the weather. And then toward the end of the project, we actually had to start holding, pay estimates because the contractor wasn't paying the subs. And so we started suspecting that things were not good in the contractor's, bank account. So, we actually learned, this was after the project was complete. We actually learned that they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on July 1st. And luckily, they're still around and they finished the correct report last week. So that's good. So lessons learned, this type of project really needs to be fully designed with accurate survey control, like I mentioned. That way that our staff can verify what we're actually building out the field. And we need some kind of standard drawing on RCUTs and the signage that applies to that. There was some confusion out in the field about the U-turn signs there. Whenever you have a turn lane that goes in the median, there's a no U-turn sign that goes there. But right after that, there's a U-turn. So it's confusing for the motorist to, okay, does this sign apply here or down there? That's the kind of confusion that we were looking at the field. The next thing is we really felt like that we needed to provide a physical barrier on each median crossover or each median turn lane. And I'll show you on the next slide. Like here, we took out pavement. Here we took out pavement. But traffic could still, because there's no concrete barrier here or here, they could still just dip across there if they wanted to, even though it's, you know, stripes, however you're supposed to use it, they still would just go across there. So we added these quick curves. They're pretty expensive, but we added them in there to help prevent the traffic from making a turn, forcing them to turn right. The next thing is, you know, how to get the information out to the public. We worked with our PIO, West Swap, who did a good job conveying that information to the public. But, you know, only so many people actually see our press releases. Only so many people watch the news. So there's a lot of people that just don't know what's going on. So I feel like we need more message boards, especially when we close down the intersections and work on the turn lanes, everything median. We put up message boards, we actually took our department message boards out, and you know, we would have a message that said, you know, make a U-turn at the next location on down the road, something to that effect, to try to provide more guidance to what they're actually supposed to do. And then, you know, just my idea for the last point there is, this project might be good to use a consultant, or do a little bit more of a plan on the media, and how to inform the public, on how to navigate this kind of change. Because it's a pretty big change. People would ask me like, so if I want to go to Bowling Green, I have to take a right, and then I take a left, I'm like this. Right. They're like, that don't make sense. So. Go back to my.
So yeah, this was a very, very interesting project. I'll just finish up real quick. Just, you know, a little bit of a call to action for all of our project development partners here. Here's a list of all of the RCUTs that have been constructed. Actually, I take that back. There's a few that aren't on this list that have been implemented other than with HSIP funds. But all these shown here are RCUTs that have been implemented by the HSIP using HSIP funds. You'll kind of see we've got them in different blocks here. So the first 8 are those 8 that have been on the ground for a little while. We've done our before and after comparison that I mentioned in one of the first slides. And then this last block, 15 through 21, that's the 7 locations that this case study project implemented. We've got a few more that are either under construction or in development. The first 4 here in Hardin County, they're nearly complete. These are on US 31 as you're heading out of E-Town, headed toward the Bradford. And those were actually a part of the back of slide. In the first 8, 5, 6, and 7, you'll see Hardin 31W. Those were up closer to Radcliffe. We had 7 RCUTs on the 31W corridor. We ended up phasing the construction loans. These 3 we got out a little quicker. The last 4 here, we held back and grouped those with a pavement rehab project. But the other of these, they're in development currently, 5 through 10 on this list. And the last 4 there, Fayette County US 25 is another little bit smaller corridor, but 3 of those 4 will be signalized RCUTs. So we're pushing to get our first signalized RCUT corridor out. Just again, a call to action is, as you're sitting in your project teams and looking at the challenges and solutions, are you ready to join the RCUT family? Here's some of the folks that have been working with the HSIP to get those first 21 RCUTs on the ground and opened up. Hopefully, we will have no space in the near future that everybody is beginning to deploy this countermeasure, because it really is an excellent countermeasure that gives us great safety benefits, but it's not at the trade-off of congestion or slower speeds or queuing or whatever. One of the few project types where you can actually say that you're helping both capacity and safety. A lot of times we say that, but those 2 things are at odds. A lot of times it's hard to find those solutions that helps both areas, but the RCUTs, they do accomplish that. So again, we just the call to action that it's time for us to look for opportunities to implement RCUTs in any project where it makes sense to add that type of intersection control. So with that, that's the end of the slideshow. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Were all the intersections non-signalized intersections?
So the question was on our US 231 corridor, were all of the existing intersections non-signalized? And yes, they were. There was some, Joe mentioned that down near Alberton, the furthest to the south intersection, we had some really severe crashes, and people were classic argument of, hey, we're having bad crashes, we need a signal. And that was a little bit of a hard message to get across to the public, that look, a traffic signal is not a safety device, it's a traffic control device. They don't necessarily give you what you're looking for. We got a different solution, and it does look strange, But, we got a different solution that'll actually give the safety benefits you're looking for. So it's a little bit of an uphill battle to convince the community. Like John mentioned, Joe was our champion on the ground. He did an excellent job talking with the community. But again, we had this high-speed corridor and we didn't, especially that Alberton intersection, where that's where they were clamoring for the signal. Just south of there, I mean, it was just no development whatsoever, speed limit 65, and we just knew plopping a signal there and asking people to wake up from the miles and miles of driving off in La La Land, it would just make matters worse. We've seen it in other situations when we have a signal that's kind of out away from town, first one to get to, and even with advanced warning flashes, we struggle to get people to realize, hey, it's red, stop. And so finding a solution that doesn't require that mainline driver to do anything, just keep driving. The onus is on that side street by pulling out. It actually simplifies the operation, gives us those safety.
We are at our deadline. Anybody has any questions?